Well, welcome. What we're doing in response to one of the comments, a number of the comments on the survey that we put out was just spending some time talking about one of the passages from the Sunday services today and going a little bit deeper, looking at the text behind the sermon that was preached as an opportunity for people to engage with it a little bit more. It will be just a conversation, pretty much one-sided because I can't hear you talking back to me. And just talking a little bit about the Bible passage and offering some thoughts on it. So this morning we were in Mark's Gospel, and it might be helpful to just see the overview of Mark's Gospel. If you imagine one of those old washing lines, where you've got a pole at one end, a pole at the other end, and a line in between, then you had the stick in the middle that you then prod up, hold the line up, and so it'd make sort of two arcs on which all your washing was hung. If you picture that, that's a bit like Mark's Gospel. Right at the start, Mark introduces the Gospel as he's introducing the good news, the Gospel about Jesus Christ, the Son of God. He gives it away right at the start. And then the first half of Mark's Gospel, up to chapter 8, is all about Mark introducing the Christ, the promised King God had promised in the Old Testament. And so in that first half of Mark's Gospel, Mark is showing us Jesus' authority, his power, and his word. And one of the themes that you see, one of the themes is the authority of Jesus, the King, the Christ. But you also see people responding either in fear or in faith. And we'll come back to that in a minute. And then you get to Mark chapter 8, which is sort of the turning point. That's the prop in the middle, because that's when Peter and the disciples finally realize Jesus is the Christ. And they just get it, and then Jesus tells them not to tell anyone. In fact, often through that first half of Mark's Gospel, Jesus is telling people not to say who he is. That's because, as well as knowing who Jesus is, the Christ, the King, people also need to understand the second part, which Mark shows us in the second half of his Gospel. Not only is Jesus the Christ, the one with all authority and power, he's also the suffering servant of Isaiah. So the first part of Mark's Gospel is, who is he? The second part is, why did he come? And there we see Jesus heading for the cross. He's come to die. 3 times in that second section, Jesus predicts or promises he's going to suffer and die and then rise. And so you see Jesus on the way to Jerusalem, the one who's come to suffer for our sins in our place. And in that half, the question about discipleship is, what does it mean to follow a crucified King, to follow a crucified Saviour? So that's sort of the two halves of Mark's Gospel. Now this morning when we were in Mark chapter 5, we are in the first half of Mark's Gospel. And there's a whole load of sort of themes that flow from the bits that we've seen previously. So just before, we had Jesus calming the storm. And we have a number of impossible situations from Mark 4:35 through chapter 5. We've got the impossible situation of the storm. You've got the impossible situation of the demon-possessed man. And Jesus, well, they're not impossible for him. But you've also got that theme of fear or faith. Do you remember the disciples in the boat? They are scared. And Jesus says, why are you so afraid? You still have no faith. You then have in this bit this morning that we looked at in chapter 5 of the people who are afraid, and then they plead with Jesus to leave their region. And then in the bit of Mark's Gospel we'll see next week, again, look out for that theme of fear and faith. Now let's look a little bit more closely at chapter 5, verses 1 to 20, which is what we looked at this morning. And you'll have noticed that we're told that Jesus goes across the Lake of Galilee, to the region of the Gerasenes. Now, when we're reading the Bible, every word matters. The Holy Spirit, through the original writer, has put that there for us. And we're told the Gerasenes. Why? Because it's the other side of the lake. It's a non-Jewish, it's a Gentile area. And it's fascinating, isn't it? When he gets out, the first person who meets him is a man with an impure spirit coming from the tombs. As we saw this morning, this man is triply unclean. Not only is he not Jewish, he's also impure, and he lives among the dead. And if you look in the Old Testament laws, those are quite significant things. But as we'll see in this next week, this does not make Jesus unclean. Actually, it's the other way round. Jesus heals the man. But it's an impossible situation. It's a Gentile area. But what's fascinating, I wonder, and we're not told too much here as to whether there's a bit of a spiritual attack thing going on here. The first person to meet Jesus is somebody who is possessed by a number of demons. The devil doesn't want to concede this area to the Son of God. Mark highlights the impossibility of the situation, just as the furious squall came up, and the details Mark included were showing how desperate and impossible the situation was in the calming of the storm. Again, Mark includes details that show just how impossible and desperate the situation is for this man. And as we saw, evil is real, but this situation is desperate. Nobody can help him. Nobody can restrain him. Well, except for one man, Jesus, the Son of God, the Christ, the one who doesn't just have authority over the wind and the waves, the one who has authority, supreme authority over demons and devils and evil spirits, all of which are basically the same thing. It's just worth as an aside, and that you see here actually some marks of demon possession. Some Christian traditions perhaps downplay and ignore this sort of thing. Others perhaps overplay it. But looking at the Gospels, there are a number of things that can be seen as sort of the key marks of somebody who is possessed. There are three. Supernatural strength, that's what this man shows. He's bound by chains and he breaks them apart. Supernatural strength. Another key mark is supernatural knowledge, knowing things that, humanly speaking, no one else could know. You see that here, don't you? Because the man comes to Jesus and cries out, "Jesus, Son of the Most High God, what do you want with me?" He knows exactly who Jesus is in a way that nobody else in the Gospels has realized and won't until chapter 8. Supernatural strength, supernatural knowledge. A third key indicator, and again, this one isn't in the text, is supernatural language, knowing a language that that person wouldn't otherwise have the ability to know, perhaps from the past or something like that. Those are three key marks: supernatural strength, supernatural knowledge, supernatural language. But anyway, this man, obviously, desperate situation, horrifically tortured, just trying to relieve the pressure. He comes to Jesus, he sees Jesus, he knows who Jesus is. But as we saw this morning, he is begging Jesus not to torment him. And actually it's the evil spirits begging Jesus not to torment him. He's got a name, he's Legion. Think of the Roman legions, all those soldiers arrayed in battle. Don't know whether you've seen the film Gladiator, but that's what we've got to be thinking. And so on the one hand, there's Jesus, the Son of God. On the other hand, there's this whole army of spirits possessing this one man. And it's a totally uneven match. If it's a wrestling match, if it's an arm wrestling match, Jesus just squashes them to the ground. They are begging him. So, we see here the superlative, the awesome power and authority of Jesus, the Christ, the King. Now, I think one of the things that often troubles people with this passage is the pigs. Again, notice the pigs. A Jewish area would not be keeping herds of pigs. So this is definitely a non-Jewish area. And you've got the demons in verse 12 begging Jesus to send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them. And Jesus has to give them permission. He's got total authority here. And they come out of the man, they go into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. And why is that detail there? And as we saw this morning, Mark's included it, I think, so that we can see the power of Jesus. You remember back to the calming of the storm? Mark includes the details. It's a furious squall, the waves coming over the boat. It's nearly swamped. So that we realize the seriousness of the situation, the power of the storm, and yet Jesus just speaks. And here again, we have a picture that shows us the power of the evil spirits, and Jesus just speaks, and it goes calm. Now, some of you will have been realizing, of course, that follows on from Mark 4. Do you remember in Mark 4, the power of the sower? And it's all about Jesus' word, the authority of his word, his power, the power of his word. This word that we have the choice to listen to or not. The waves didn't have a choice. They just had to obey. The demons didn't have a choice. They just had to obey. Interesting, isn't it? Whereas you and I have a choice to what we do with Jesus' words. Jesus says, consider carefully what you hear. He who has ears to hear, listen. And then you get the different responses to this miracle. I mean, it's very human, isn't it? Those tending the pigs run off and report it in the town and countryside. You would. That's exactly what you would do. Not only with the loss of the pigs, but this man healed. And the striking thing, and I remember Rich preaching on this parable, and not this parable, this story, this account in Luke's gospel, making the point that Jesus not only heals the man, he restores the man. He restores the man to his community. He restores the man to full health. He's there, he's dressed, he's in his right mind. That's the power of Jesus. Now, of course, those who had seen it told the people what had happened and told about the pigs as well. And then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. Again, it's a striking thing, isn't it, that we're more comfortable often with the darkness and the evil that we're used to than someone who will completely overturn what we are used to. Now, when we were talking about this passage before, when we were putting together the all-age service, we were talking about, how does this apply to nowadays? Because we didn't want to scare the kids and all that sort of thing. But we realized, actually, there's a whole load of evil influence, dark stuff that goes on, and often we're just comfortable with it. The spiritists, the mediums, the Ouija boards, all that stuff. And so much it's in people's lives, the superstition and that sort of thing. And it's there. Obviously, there are other cultures and other backgrounds where it's even stronger, where there is a real belief and fear of evil spirits, where there's a real fear of black magic, and where it has real power and influence. And this passage is huge good news, isn't it? Into that culture, Jesus has supreme power. Which are you going to go for? Jesus or the other stuff? But what you see then, is that this, in some ways, the whole Jew-Gentile distinction, based on where you are geographically, is quite a key thing here to understand why Mark has included this. Because otherwise we'd be a bit confused why Jesus does tell this man to go and speak about him. Because if you flick back to previous chapters, Jesus heals people and then tells them not to tell them. So if you look at the end of chapter 1, there's a man who's unclean. who's got leprosy, who's unclean. Chapter 143, Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them. Instead, he went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. As a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly. So in the end of Mark chapter 1, Jesus is saying, don't tell anybody. And here in chapter 5, he's saying to this guy, go and tell everybody. And we get confused. Why? What's the difference? Well, in chapter 1, it's in a Jewish area where people have prior expectations of who the Christ, who the Messiah would be. And Jesus needs to be doing his ministry, demonstrating who he is, so that people can get to see who he is without their prior sort of prejudice or assumptions clouding that. Though, as we see, they will get in the way. Whereas in chapter 5, where we are now, in verses 1 to 20, Jesus is in a Gentile area. They don't have that heritage of the promises from the prophets. They don't have the Old Testament law that has all that stuff that's been preparing them for the arrival of the Messiah. And so Jesus now is telling to these people in spiritual darkness, without the light of the revelation of the Old Testament, he's saying, look, go and tell them what the Lord has done. Go and tell them how he's had mercy on you, so that the name of the Lord, it's interesting that Jesus uses the word Lord. Think Old Testament name for God, Yahweh, translated Lord for us. Go and tell them how much the Lord has done for you. So in this land of spiritual darkness, where no doubt they were worshipping idols, where there was a connection with demons and the demonic, where there was all sorts of dark spiritual stuff going on, this man is being sent as a missionary by Jesus to his own people to say, look how much Yahweh has done for me. And the man goes away into the Decapolis, not just to his hometown, and he hears how much Jesus has done for him. So that's why Jesus, I think, is keen to send that man, but doesn't do it in other situations. In fact, whenever he's in the Jewish areas, he's saying, no, don't tell anybody. And that's when we get to Mark 8, when the disciples finally get that Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, he then says, don't tell anybody, because they haven't realized that they'd just be like, let's make him king. They haven't realized that he's the king who's come to suffer and die, and that following him isn't about a victorious marching into Jerusalem. It's coming to suffer and die with Jesus, being willing to walk the path of the cross. But the man goes away, as he was told, began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people are amazed. As I said this morning, it's almost like Jesus sends this guy as a missionary. He's like the John the Baptist to the Gentile area. He's going to tell how much Jesus had done for him, so that when Pentecost comes and then the apostles go and preach the good news of the Christ, the King who came, who suffered, the King with authority who gave his life, and then rose from the dead, when that message is fully understood and then is proclaimed, both first to Jerusalem, then to Samaria, then to the ends of the earth, which would include the Decapolis, this man has gone ahead and prepared the way, because they'll have heard about Jesus, the one who had all authority over evil and healed this man. Well, next time we'll be looking at Mark 5:21 onwards, and we'll be seeing some more impossible situations, spot the fear and faith. We're back in a Jewish territory again, so you'll discover this thing about Jesus keeping things secret and hidden, but that's for next time. Hopefully that's helped you see a little bit of the background and looked a bit more detail at the text. One of the things to always ask is, why has Mark put this here? Why has he said this and not this? What's going on? Hopefully that has been useful. Why not look at the next bit of Mark and see what you make of it in advance of next Sunday?